Shalom and welcome back to God's Story, Our Story, Catholics for Israel's online Bible course. I'm Dr. Andrea Villeneuve. Today we continue our study of the conquest and initial settlement of the Israelites in the Promised Land. Last time we studied the book of Joshua and we saw how, on the whole, this was a very successful period for the Israelites. The Exodus came to an end, they crossed the Jordan on dry ground, they successfully conquered the city of Jericho with some supernatural intervention. They did experience a setback in their first attempt to conquer the city of Ai, but on their second attempt, they did succeed in taking the city. They moved towards the south, where they conquered several cities there, and then to the north, where they conquered cities in the Galilee. In the second part of the book, we saw how, under the leadership of Joshua, they distributed the conquered land to the various tribes, and they conquered much but not all of the Promised Land. At the end of the book, before Joshua's death, he reminded the people of how important it was to keep the covenant that the Lord had made with them, especially as expressed in the book of Deuteronomy. Namely, if you follow the commandments and are faithful to the Lord, he will abundantly bless you. But if you fail to keep the covenant and disobey his commandments, you will reap curses. And we're going to see the laws of Deuteronomy played out in this book and all the following ones. As we come to the book of Judges, we have to say that this is not the most glorious chapter in Israel's history. In fact, many scholars would describe the book of Judges as an epic fail in the story of Israel. There are many lessons to be learned from this book because just as the laws of Deuteronomy are still very active in the book of Judges, they are also active in our own lives. And so, which way shall we choose? Will we choose to serve and follow the Lord and obey his commandments, reaping blessings, or are we going to disobey his covenants and commandments and reap curses? So many great lessons to be learned from this turbulent and chaotic book of Judges. Historical background of the book of Judges. It's a short time after the conquest. We are around the year 1380 BC, and the book covers a fairly long period of time from around 1380 to 1030 BC, so something like 350 years if we go with the early date of the Exodus. This is the time of large ethnic migrations throughout the Near East. It's a time of change and transformation with the decline and demise of the great cultures, including the Hittites, who were based up here in what is modern-day Turkey, the Minoans, based on the island of Crete, and the Mycenaeans, who were basically ancient Greeks. And so with the demise of these great cultures, we see the end of the Bronze Age and the beginning of the Iron Age around 1200 BC. So that's going to lead to great changes in the technology and use of metals in that period, overlapping the period of the Judges. It's also the time of the arrival of the so-called Sea Peoples. These were various groups of people who came from Greece or Mycenae and began to invade all the coastal areas of northern Egypt and of the Levant, meaning Egypt, Canaan, and ancient Phoenicia, which is today Lebanon. And the most famous of these sea peoples would be the Philistines, who are going to become a force to be reckoned with in the land. And here on this map, you can see the invasion of the sea peoples coming from Mycenae, Greece, from Crete, and invading these coastal areas of Egypt and Canaan. With the demise of the great superpowers of the time, as we said, this includes the Hittites and also Egypt, we're going to see the rise of several smaller kingdoms who will be talked about very much in the following books of the Bible. So you can see the rise here of Phoenicia, Aram or Syria, Ammon, Moab, Edom, and the Philistines, as we said, are going to take the coastal areas of Canaan. And we have here the newly formed Israel, which is one of these smaller kingdoms that emerges out of this period. Outline of the book of Judges. The book begins with a double prologue highlighting the failures of Israel. The first prologue underlines the social disorder and the incomplete conquest. The second prologue turns to the religious disorder with the pattern of disobedience that we're going to see throughout the whole book. The central narrative tells us about the stories of the judges proper, including this covenant disobedience and judgment. So the history of the judges from chapters 3 to 16. Then we have an epilogue that shows us this collapse of society, including a religious disintegration with the story of Micah's idol and the tribe of Dan that migrates towards the north, and the social disintegration with the Levite's concubine, how she is raped and murdered and cut into 12 pieces. So quite a gruesome story that leads to a civil war between the tribes of Israel. As we said, it's a book that reflects chaos leading towards anarchy because the people of Israel did not follow the covenants and commandments of the Lord. The first introduction is about the incomplete conquest. The book begins with the continued but incomplete conquest of the land, and it's going to highlight the successes but mostly failures of the tribes in taking the whole land. It begins with the tribes of Judah and Simeon, who do experience some victories led by Caleb, but then we're told that the tribe of Benjamin did not drive the Jebusites from Jerusalem, and the rest of the tribes also experienced mostly failures. For each of the tribe, the refrain is that each tribe did not drive out the inhabitants of the cities that had been allotted to them. So it goes on with Manasseh, Ephraim, Zebulun, Asher, Naphtali, and then it ends with the tribe of Dan, who positively experienced failure. It says that the Amorites pressed the Danites back into the hill country, and so the Danites are defeated by the Amorites. If you look at these tribes, you're going to see that actually there's a pattern. It's moving from south to north, and that's going to establish a pattern that the rest of the book of Judges is going to follow. There's an appearance of the angel of the Lord that warns Israel in this place called Bochim, which significantly means weeping. And what does the angel of the Lord say to Israel? It says that, well, the Lord took you out of Egypt and had great promises for you, but you failed to obey the Lord's commandments. You failed to cast out the inhabitants of the land. And so as a punishment, the Lord says, I will not drive out these nations from before you, and they will remain adversaries to you, and their gods shall be a snare to you. So we can see that the very failure of the Israelites to carry out the Lord's commandments will become their own punishment. It's also significant because the angel of the Lord appeared to Joshua. So there's a contrast here between the obedience of Joshua to the angel of the Lord at the beginning of Joshua and the disobedience of the Israelites to the angel of the Lord here at the beginning of the book of Judges. As I just said, there is a pattern in how the tribes are listed in the beginning of the book of Judges, beginning with Judah, and it's moving from south to north. So Judah, Benjamin, then Joseph, including Manasseh and Ephraim, then Zebulun, Asher, Naphtali, and it ends with the tribe of Dan. When we look at the central narrative of the book of Judges, we see that it begins with the judge Othniel from the tribe of Judah, then Ehud from the tribe of Benjamin, then Deborah from the tribe of Ephraim, Gideon from the tribe of Manasseh, Jephthah also from the tribe of Manasseh, and then it fast forwards to the end with Samson, who is from the tribe of Dan. So this establishes this pattern, and in fact this downward spiral as each one of the judges becomes, as we will see, worse than his predecessor. The second introduction tells us about the pattern of disobedience that we're going to see in the book of Judges. It uses Deuteronomic language that once again points to the blessings and curses, that if Israel fails to follow the commandments, they will not be successful. In fact, we see a bit of a flashback here. The text backtracks to the time when Joshua was still alive, and we see him die again without leaving a successor. And here we read about these ominous words, another generation arose who did not know the Lord or the work which he had done for Israel. This verse, you may recognize it. It sounds a lot like at the beginning of the book of Exodus, and a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And so just as this was ominous at the beginning of the book of Exodus, pointing to this threat that's going to come from the outside of the people, here we're seeing this threat that's not coming from the outside, but from the inside, from within the people. And so now it's another generation that rises up within Israel who did not know the Lord, and this is not going to go well for the people. The very next verse tells us that the Israelites did evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. So right there we begin with this covenantal unfaithfulness that is going to lead to a lot of chaos in Israel. This provokes God's anger against them, and he will deliver them to their enemies. This sets us up for this so-called sinful cycle that we find throughout the whole book of Judges. The Lord, being merciful, raises up judges to deliver his people, but we're going to see a vicious cycle of sin, servitude, supplication, salvation, silence, going back to sin. The anger of the Lord is going to be kindled against Israel, and so the Canaanite nations remain in Israel as a punishment to test and refine Israel. So the question is, are we looking at some cyclic history here in the book of Judges, or is it more like a downward spiral? And it's really both. It is a cyclic history, but as we said, the judges become worse and worse. So here's this cycle that we find in the book of Judges. Israel serves the Lord for some time, but because of their prosperity, they fall into complacency, sin, and idolatry, which is going to lead to their oppression and enslavement from these foreign enemies. That's going to lead to them crying out to the Lord so that the Lord in his mercy will raise up the judge. The judge delivers Israel, and this leads to a time of peace, but peace leads to prosperity and complacency, and the cycle begins again. As we said, this is very significant because every nation really goes through this type of cycle, a cycle of prosperity leading to complacency, leading to sin, to unfaithfulness. That's going to lead to the unleashing of curses against every nation, and hopefully leading to a crying out to the Lord, to repentance, where the Lord will be able to restore his people. So let's keep that in mind as we study the story of the ancient judges. A quick survey or overview of the judges. As we can see, it covers quite a long time, and the dates don't exactly match. Because if we add up all the years between the time that the Israelites are oppressed and the judges, it adds up to around 410 years. So even if we go with the early date of the Exodus, we don't really have all that much time between about 1380 to about 1030, which is the beginning of the reign of King Saul in 1 Samuel. So there must be necessarily some overlap here between the various periods of oppression and the judges. There are 6 major judges that are written here in capital letters, and also 6 minor judges who are mentioned very briefly through the account. So we're going to rapidly skim through these major events and the stories of the judges. The first major judge is Othniel, the son of Kenaz, and he happens to be Caleb's brother from the tribe of Judah. We're told that Israel served the Baals and the Asherah, and they are delivered into the hands of Cushan-Rishathaim, the king of Mesopotamia, for 8 years, who oppresses the people of God. God raises up Othniel, and he has the Spirit of the Lord, and he is able to deliver his people so that they have peace for 40 years. It's quite a short account because this judge is basically exemplary. He does not have any flaws or failures, so it makes for a shorter story to tell. The second judge is Ehud, the son of Gera, and he is from the tribe of Benjamin. We're told again this refrain that Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and so the Lord sends an oppressor, Eglon, the king of Moab, along with Ammon and Amalek, who are going to oppress the Israelites for 18 years. Ehud is going to become Israel's deliverer, and his claim to fame is that he stabs Eglon as he is relieving himself in his tent. And so it's a shocking scene because he is left-handed. He managed to bypass the security of Eglon, king of Moab, stabs him, escapes, and the Israelites are able to defeat the Moabites, and they have peace for 80 years. So far, Eglon, cunning, but still not any major flaws that we're told about him. Then we have a minor judge, Shamgar, the son of Anat. He famously kills 600 Philistines. And our next story is the story of Deborah and Barak. Deborah is a prophetess, and Barak and Yael will be the other players in this story from the tribe of Ephraim. Israel once again does evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord now sends this oppressor, Jabin, the king of Canaan, and his commander Sisera, who oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. Thanks to Deborah's able leadership, they go out to battle against Jabin and the Canaanites. Barak defeats Sisera's army. Sisera makes an escape and finds refuge, or he thinks he's finding refuge, in the tent of a certain Yael, and Yael will basically deceive him, and when he falls asleep, she drives a peg into his temple, killing this oppressor of Israel. So women here have the upper hand in this chapter of the book of Judges, with Deborah, the prophetess, and Yael, who kills their enemy. This leads to the poetic Song of Deborah in chapter 5 of Judges, and Israel has peace for 40 years. The next judge is Gideon, and he is going to be named also Yerubbaal, which means the one who contended against Baal, son of Joash from the tribe of Manasseh. Now the oppressor is Midian and Amalek, the arch enemies of Israel, for 7 years. And so the Lord sends an anonymous prophet who has a message for the Israelites, calls them to repent, and we see the angel of the Lord who returns and calls Gideon to deliver his people. Gideon is going to offer sacrifice, and he is commissioned by this angel of the Lord to destroy his father's altar of Baal. Gideon is a bit of a coward. He does it at night, but he does it nevertheless and destroys this altar. And then he is called to go fight against Israel's enemies, and he's going to need some confirmation. And here we see the famous episode of the fleece of wool. He's asking twice for a sign from the Lord to make sure that the Lord is going to be with him. And so he asks for this fleece to remain dry as the rest of the area is wet by the morning dew. The Lord agrees and gives him these signs, but then Gideon wants to go fight the oppressors of Israel with too large of an army. So the Lord will trim this army down to 300 men, quite a small group to fight a vastly superior group of enemies. Gideon leads the Israelites to victory against the Midianites and the Amalekites. They kill the princes, Oreb and Zeev, and then Gideon himself is going to kill Zebach and Salmunah, the kings of Midian. So a successful military operation on the part of Gideon, but near the end of his life he makes a private golden ephod, and the text says that Israel plays the harlot with it. And so Gideon usurps a type of priestly role, and Israel engages in this illicit worship of this golden ephod. So not a claim to fame for Gideon. Still, the Israelites have peace for 40 years, and at the end of Gideon's life, we're told that he was quite prolific with the women, and from his numerous wives, he has 70 sons, plus another son from a concubine called Abimelech. And so Gideon dies, and we're going to see the situation in Israel devolving more and more into chaos from that point on. After the death of Gideon, Israel played the harlot with the Baals and made Baal-berith their god. So they sink deeper into idolatry, and there's going to be consequences for that idolatry. The next character in our story is Abimelech, and he is not called a judge. He is a type of anti-judge, the son of Gideon, or son of Yerubbaal. He kills all 70 sons of Gideon except for one, the youngest, who is called Yotam, and crowns himself king of the city of Shechem. So Abimelech has a violent thirst for power. He eliminates all his opponents and crowns himself as this little tyrant over the city of Shechem. Yotam, the surviving son of Gideon, comes to the men of Shechem and tells them a parable of trees. He tells them that the trees of the forest asked for a leader. They wanted a king to rule over them. So they asked the olive tree, the fig tree, and the vine to rule over them. But these trees were already productive. They produced good and sweet fruit, and so they declined the offer. Why should we waste our time ruling over others when we already do something very good and very useful? Then the trees asked the bramble to rule over them, and the bramble, being completely worthless and useless, agrees. What's the point of this parable? Well, the trees are like the men of Shechem, and the bramble is Abimelech, this worthless fellow who is now ruling over Shechem because of his acts of violence. Sure enough, there follows a civil war between Abimelech and Shechem, and so his reign is short-lived. And after killing many people in the city of Shechem, he goes to another city called Thebez, and there, in humiliation and disgrace, he is killed by a woman who throws a millstone from the tower of the city. So that is the humiliating death of Abimelech, this anti-judge in the middle of the book of Judges. Following the story of Abimelech, the text tells us about two other minor judges, Tola, who rules for 23 years, and Yair, who rules for 22 years. The next major judge is Jephthah. And once again, we see this downward spiral in the character of the judges. So what is the deal with this Jephthah? He's a Gileadite, meaning from the tribes on the eastern shore of the Jordan. The sin is now that Israel serves the Baals and Ashtoreth, the gods of Syria, Sidon, Moab, Ammon, and the Philistines. So the idolatry is becoming more and more common among the people of God. God sends oppressors, the Philistines and the Ammonites, who oppressed them for 18 years. And so Israel cries out to God, and there's actually a brief episode of repentance there among the people. The elders of Gilead then choose to make Jephthah their commander. And once again, we don't see great integrity of character. Jephthah has a fairly defiant message to the Ammonites, and infamously for him, he makes a rash vow where he promises to offer up to God the first thing that comes out of his house after his victory against the Ammonites, thinking probably that it would be some kind of animal that comes out of his house. Jephthah wins the victory against Ammon, but to his great distress as he returns home, his own daughter is the first one who walks out of his door, and so he does as he promised, and he sacrifices his own daughter. So we see once again this downward spiral, not a great claim to fame for Jephthah. A civil war follows between the tribes of Gilead and the tribe of Ephraim, and so we see the situation in Israel devolving further and further into anarchy. After the death of Jephthah, we are told of a few more minor judges, Ibzan of Bethlehem, Elon the Zebulunite, and Abdon the son of Hillel. This leads us to the last and most infamous of the judges, none other than Samson. Samson is from the tribe of Dan, and he is going to judge Israel for 20 years. The Philistines are now the oppressors of Israel for 40 years. And we have a really interesting type of annunciation when the angel of the Lord appears to Samson's father, Manoah, and to his wife who is barren, and they are quite shocked that they are able to see and talk to the angel of the Lord. Following this annunciation and this special calling to this son who is to be dedicated in a special way to the Lord, Samson is born, and his calling is that he should be a Nazirite. Remember what a Nazirite is supposed to do or not to do? He's supposed to refrain from drinking alcohol, from becoming ritually unclean by approaching a dead body, and from cutting his hair. And we're going to see Samson, tragically, who violates all three of these prescriptions. Samson also had a weakness for Philistine women. He marries a Philistine wife in Timnah, and then goes and kills a lion. Later he comes back and approaches the corpse of the lion, which now has honey within it. And from this incident, from eating honey from the carcass of the lion, Samson will tell a riddle to the people. What's the point of this riddle? The point is that his wife will entice him to reveal the meaning of the riddle to his people so that he loses his bet. And that's going to anticipate later in his life when Delilah will also entice him to reveal the secret of his strength. Because what is the secret of his strength? It is the length of his hair. As long as his hair is not cut, that's how he has his supernatural strength. All of Samson's life is chaos. He fights many battles against the Philistines. He manages to catch 300 foxes and with their tails sets fire to the fields. The Philistines come and murder his wife and her father. Then he takes a donkey jawbone and enacts revenge upon the Philistines, killing many of them. Samson then falls for a harlot, and most infamously is the story of his romance with the Philistine woman, Delilah. Delilah manages to get him to reveal the secret of his strength, and so they cut his hair. The Philistines come and capture him, and this is going to lead to his death. He is more glorious in his death than in his life. As he is captured by the Philistines, he is brought into this hall where the Philistines are celebrating and also mocking him. So he prays a final prayer. His strength has returned because his hair has grown back, so he pulls the columns and the house collapses upon him and upon all the Philistines there. And so he brings a final victory in his death. All in all, quite a pathetic figure because he really fails to hold up not only to the Nazirite vow to which he was consecrated from before his birth, but we see how he is completely carried by his passions and really fails to live out the calling that the Lord had for him. So it's a sobering reminder. We see that the Lord can have a calling on someone, but it's never going to override your free will. the Lord always respects our free will, and so we have to remain faithful to what the Lord is calling us to do, because we may truly shipwreck our lives, as we see in the case of Samson. Samson is the last major story of the Judges, and as we come to chapter 17, this is really the epilogue of the book, where we see the chaos and anarchy that falls upon Israel. There's the story of Micah, who is an Ephraimite, and he makes an idol of silver and hires a private priest, which is obviously forbidden by the Torah, especially the book of Deuteronomy. At this point, we hear about the tribe of Dan that migrates to the north, and they encounter this Micah. They steal the idol and the priest, and as they move further to the north, they establish their own private shrine over there after destroying and massacring the peaceful inhabitants of Laish. They rebuild the city, erect this graven image, and so the Danites fall deep into idolatry and illicit worship with their private shrine up in the north. Then the situation devolves still further into civil war and anarchy. We're told about a Levite who has a concubine in Bethlehem, and he is well treated by the father of his concubine, but then as they leave, they stop in Gibeah in Benjamin, and there the men of Gibeah rape his concubine and basically leave her for dead at the entrance of the door, in a shocking event that reminds us of the events of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis chapter 19. What does this Levite do? He cuts her up into 12 pieces, sends one piece to each of the tribes of Israel. All the tribes are incensed and scandalized at what the men of Benjamin have done, and so all of Israel goes out to war against the tribe of Benjamin, almost annihilating them. It seems like the women of Benjamin were also decimated, because in chapter 21 we have another crisis that there are no wives for the remaining sons of Benjamin. So the Israelites refuse to give of their own daughters to the Benjaminites, and finally they find a solution by getting some women from Gilead, from the east of the Jordan, to give to the Benjaminites. So almost the total annihilation of one of the tribes of Israel in this terrible civil war. At the end of the book of Judges, it sure seems like anarchy reigns among the people of Israel. We have some good judges near the beginning, but we see them becoming more and more unruly, more and more slaves of their passions, and so it's truly chaos and anarchy in the land, so that this infamous last statement in the book of Judges says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." So definitely a situation of anarchy that is not good, and that's going to require new intervention of the Lord in the next few books. Here's our chronology of the book of Judges. As we can see, it begins in the late 1300s BC. Here are the judges we talked about, beginning with Othniel, Ehud, Deborah, and this is the time of the famous Merneptah stela. This is a famous monument because it is the first extra-biblical mention of Israel. It's an Egyptian inscription commemorating a military victory during the reign of Pharaoh Merneptah, who reigned approximately from 1213 to 1203 BC. It's the earliest known attestation of Israel outside of the Bible, so dating around 1209 BC. And what does this inscription say? Israel is laid waste, his seed is not. So a significant inscription here from the time of the Judges. And here's the latter part of the Judges. We can see Gideon, Abimelech, his short-lived reign in Shechem, and then Jephthah and Samson. So this leads us to around 1050 BC, at the eve of the kingship or monarchy in Israel. Before we leave today, we want to say a few things about the lovely book of Ruth, which takes place in this chaotic period of the Judges. So we see that God is still active, working among the few faithful, even in a time of great disobedience and unbelief among the people of Israel. What is this story? We're told about an Israelite called Elimelech, who marries a woman called Naomi, and because of a famine, they move to Moab along with their two sons. The two sons marry two Moabite women called Orpah and Ruth. Unfortunately, Elimelech and his sons die in Moab, leaving Naomi and her daughters-in-law completely destitute. Naomi decides to return to Bethlehem. Even though she sends her two daughters-in-law away, Ruth decides to return with her, saying these famous words, "Entreat me not to leave you or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God." Beautiful words of solidarity here from Ruth the Moabite, who decides to adopt Naomi's people and Naomi's God as her own. But as they return to Bethlehem, they have nothing. They are completely poor and destitute. So in this setting, Ruth providentially encounters a man called Boaz, who is a wealthy landowner, and he allows Ruth to glean his field in accordance with the laws of the Torah. She has a conversation with him by the threshing floor at night, and he decides to marry her. So Boaz redeems and marries Ruth, and this is going to lead to the birth of their son, Obed. And why is that significant? Because Ruth will be the great-grandmother of King David. And so we see this beautiful example of God's providence in the midst of the chaotic time of the Judges. And here's a last timeline of this period from Israel's entrance into the Promised Land around 1406 BC through the Judges that we studied to Samson. And as we said, we are around the year 1050. Israel conquered the land, but the initial victories under Joshua were soon forgotten as the people turned away from God during the time of the Judges. It was a period marked by chaos and disunity. Yet this was not the end of Israel's story. A new chapter was on the horizon, the rise of the kingdom. Join us next time as we delve into these transformative events in the books of Samuel.